Madison Ashford had gone through 17 tutors in 3 years, and that was just counting the ones who'd lasted more than a week. The daughter of tech billionaire Richard Ashford walked through the halls of Preston Academy like she owned the place, which technically her father did since his donations basically funded the entire East Wing. She was 15 years old with perfectly styled blonde hair that cost more to maintain than most people's monthly rent, designer clothes that she'd deliberately rumple just to show she didn't care, and an expression of contempt that had been perfected over years of getting exactly what she wanted. The teachers at Preston had learned to simply step aside when they saw her coming, their lesson plans and disciplinary procedures worthless against someone whose father could have them fired with a single phone call. Madison's latest incident had involved accidentally spilling an entire cafeteria tray on the principal's daughter, though everyone knew there was nothing accidental about it. The girl had made the mistake of sitting in what Madison considered her seat, and Madison Ashford didn't do warnings. She crushed people who got in her way, watched them scramble, and moved on without a second thought. The school had called an emergency meeting with her father, the third one that semester, and Richard Ashford had shown up in his $1,000 suit, made the appropriate apologetic noises, written another massive check, and left within 20 minutes. He hadn't even looked at Madison during the entire meeting. That was their relationship in a nutshell. She acted out, he threw money at the problem, and they both went back to their separate lives in their separate wings of their 30,000 square foot mansion. Madison told herself she didn't care, that she preferred it this way, that needing anyone was weakness. She'd learned that lesson when her mother had walked out 6 years ago without even a goodbye, just a note on monogrammed stationery, and a first-class ticket to Paris that she'd apparently been planning for months. Her father had buried himself in work, building his empire bigger and bigger, as if enough zeros in his bank account could fill the hole his wife had left behind. Madison had been 9 years old, standing in that enormous empty house, realizing that all the money in the world couldn't make someone stay, if they didn't want. So she'd built walls instead, turned herself into someone so difficult, so impossible to deal with, that no one would ever get close enough to leave her again. If everyone already hated her, their rejection couldn't hurt. It was perfect logic in its own twisted way. The thing was, Madison was actually brilliant, her IQ tested in the genius range, and before everything fell apart, she'd been the kind of kid who read college-level books for fun, and won every academic competition she entered. But somewhere along the way she'd figured out that being smart just made people expect things from you, put pressure on you, try to mold you into what they wanted. Being difficult was so much simpler. No one expected anything from the problem child, except problem. The day everything changed started like any other Thursday morning at Preston Academy. Madison arrived in the town car her father sent, walked past the students who whispered and scattered like pigeons, and headed to her first period class with every intention of making Miss Peterson's life miserable for the next 50 minutes. She didn't notice the new janitor mopping the hallway, didn't register the way he nodded politely as she passed, didn't see the small smile on his weathered face when she deliberately knocked over a trash can just because she could. James Martinez had seen worse than a 15-year-old girl with an attitude problem. He'd seen combat in the Middle East, watched friends die in desert sand, and came home to find his wife had left him with a 6-year-old daughter, and no explanation beyond a text message saying she couldn't do it anymore. He'd worked 3 jobs while raising Emma alone, putting himself through night school to get his teaching degree, and ended up taking the janitorial position at Preston because it paid better than substitute teaching and had benefits his daughter needed. He was 42 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from too many years of not enough sleep, and absolutely nothing about Madison Ashford scared him even a little bit. The collision happened during passing period when the hallways were packed with students rushing between classes. Madison was texting on her phone, not watching where she was going because she never had to. People always moved out of her way, except James Martinez was pushing his cleaning cart around the corner at the exact same moment, and he wasn't watching for teenage royalty who thought traffic laws didn't apply to them. They hit hard enough that Madison's phone went flying. Her designer bag spilled its contents across the floor, and she landed on her rear end in a very undignified heap. The hallway went silent. Everyone froze, waiting for the explosion they knew was coming. Madison's face flushed red with rage as she looked up at the janitor who'd just committed what everyone at Preston knew was basically a death sentence offense. She opened her mouth to unleash the kind of verbal destruction that had made grown teachers cry. But James spoke first. "You okay?" he asked, and the genuine concern in his voice completely threw her off her script. He was already kneeling down, gathering her scattered belongings without a trace of the fear or groveling she expected. He picked up her phone, checked it for damage, and handed it back to her. Screen's not cracked. Lucky. Madison stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Nobody helped her. People either feared her or hated her, but they definitely didn't show concern for her welfare after she'd basically run them down in the hallway. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she finally managed, her voice cold enough to freeze nitrogen. James looked at her with eyes that had seen actual problems, actual suffering, and apparently found a rich kid's tantrum somewhat underwhelming. "You're Madison Ashford. Your father owns half the tech companies in Seattle. You've been kicked out of 4 schools in 3 years. You're allergic to shellfish and you play piano when no one's listening." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was reading items off a grocery list, then went back to collecting her things. Madison felt something crack in her chest, some small fissure in the armor she'd spent years constructing. "How do you know that?" James shrugged. "I pay attention. Part of my job knowing the school, knowing the students, staying out of the way but keeping everyone safe." He picked up a small photo that had fallen from her bag, a picture of her and her mother from before everything went wrong. He looked at it for just a second before handing it back, and something in his expression made Madison's throat tight. It wasn't pity. She would have destroyed him for pity. It was understanding, like he knew exactly what that photo meant and what it cost her to keep carrying it around. "I need to finish this hallway before next period," James said, standing up and offering her his hand. Madison ignored it and scrambled to her feet on her own, snatching the rest of her things from the floor. "Stay out of my way," she snapped. But even she could hear how weak it sounded. Something had shifted in that moment and they both knew it. James just nodded. "Sure thing. Watch where you're going next time though. Not everyone's gonna be as soft a landing as my cleaning cart." He winked at her, actually winked, and then went back to mopping like nothing had happened. Madison stood there surrounded by students who were now whispering and staring, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: curiosity. Who was this janitor who knew things about her that she'd never told anyone? How did he know about the piano? She only played late at night when her father was still at the office and the house staff had gone home. She'd made sure no one at school knew about it because it was hers, the one thing she did that wasn't about rebellion or destruction or pushing people away. Over the next few days, Madison found herself watching James Martinez. She noticed how he talked to every student with the same quiet respect, from the scholarship kids to the trust fund baby. She saw how he'd leave extra supplies in classrooms before teachers realized they were running low, how he knew everyone's name, how he seemed to materialize whenever someone needed help carrying something or finding a lost item. And she noticed the picture he kept tucked in his shirt pocket. A little girl, maybe 11 or 12, with dark hair and a bright smile, wearing a soccer uniform. His daughter, obviously. Emma Martinez. She learned from listening to him talk with other staff members. She had juvenile diabetes and played midfielder for her club team, and wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. James worked the evening shift at Preston and the night shift at a warehouse to afford her medical supplies and the private school she attended across town. Madison told herself she didn't care, that it didn't matter, that this janitor was just another person who'd eventually disappoint her or leave or prove that nobody really gave a damn about anyone but themselves. Madison decided to test him. That's what she did with everyone: eventually pushed them until they broke, until they showed their true colors, until they proved they were just like everyone else. She started small, leaving messes in hallways she knew were his responsibility, knocking over trash cans, spilling drinks. James just cleaned them up without comment, without even seeming annoyed. So she escalated. She accidentally destroyed an entire shelf of cleaning supplies in the janitor's closet, thousands of dollars worth of products coating the floor in a toxic rainbow, the kind of thing that would get a student expelled anywhere, except Preston Academy, where her father's money made her bulletproof. The next morning, she found James in the music room. He was sitting at the piano, the one she thought no one knew she used, playing a simple melody with surprising skill. Madison stood in the doorway, her heart pounding with a mixture of rage and something else she couldn't quite name. "That room was locked," she said coldly. James looked up and smiled. "Janitors have keys to everything, one of the perks of being invisible." He patted the bench beside him. "Come here. I want to show you something." Madison didn't move. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to fix me like I'm some kind of project. Save the poor broken rich girl and feel good about yourself. I've seen it before from therapists and counselors and teachers who think they understand me. You don't. You can't." James stopped playing and turned to face her fully. His expression wasn't angry or disappointed or pitying. It was just honest. "You're right. I don't understand exactly what you're going through. Your life is nothing like mine, but I do understand being angry at the world. I understand building walls so high that nobody can climb over them, and I understand that sometimes the people who look the strongest are actually holding on by their fingernails." He stood up and walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance away. "I'm not trying to fix you, Madison. You're not broken. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken things need to be repaired. Hurt things need time and space, and sometimes just one person who won't walk away no matter how hard you push." Madison felt tears burning behind her eyes and hated herself for it. She never cried. Crying was weakness, and weakness got you hurt. "Why do you care?" she whispered. "You're just the janitor. You clean up messes. That's your job." "I'm not your job." James shook his head. "No, you're not. But my daughter Emma, she went through something similar. When her mom left, she spent 2 years making everyone around her miserable because she was so scared of being abandoned again. She pushed away friends, got kicked out of programs, failed classes she could have aced in her sleep. And you know what I learned? The kids who act out the most are usually the ones who need help the most. They're the ones testing you, seeing if you'll stick around when things get ugly. So yeah, I see you, Madison, and I'm not going anywhere just because you knock over some trash cans or destroy some cleaning supply." Madison's carefully constructed mask cracked. "I don't need your help. I don't need anyone." But her voice broke on the last word, and James heard it. "Okay," he said simply, "but just so you know, I'm going to keep showing up. I'm going to keep being here, not because I want to fix you or change you, or make you into something you're not, just because everyone deserves to have at least one person in their corner who doesn't give up on them. Consider me that person, whether you want me to be or not." He walked past her toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Madison, the cleaning supplies you destroyed yesterday, those come out of the school's maintenance budget, which is already stretched thin. The reason I work here instead of teaching, which is what I actually went to school for, is because this job pays enough to cover my daughter's insulin. Those supplies you trashed, that's a week of her medication, so if you want to hurt me, you succeed. But next time you decide to test someone, maybe consider who else you might be hurting in the process." He left her standing there in the music room, and for the first time in 6 years, Madison Ashford felt genuine shame. Not because someone had yelled at her or punished her or threatened her, but because someone had treated her like she was capable of being better. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the photo James carried of his daughter, kept thinking about a little girl who needed insulin to survive, and a father who worked 2 jobs to provide it. She thought about her own father who could buy a pharmaceutical company on a whim but couldn't be bothered to eat dinner with her once a week. And she thought about her mother, who'd had everything anyone could want and still walked away, because apparently having Madison as a daughter wasn't enough reason to stay. Madison stood outside the janitor's office for 20 minutes before she finally knocked. It was Friday afternoon, and most of the students had already left for the weekend. She could hear James inside, moving around, probably doing paperwork or inventory or whatever janitors did when they weren't cleaning up after privileged teenagers who treated them like furniture. When he opened the door, he looked surprised to see her, but not unwelcoming. "Madison, what can I do for you?" She thrust an envelope at him before she could lose her nerve. "This is for the cleaning supplies, and extra for your daughter's medication. And before you say anything, I didn't steal it or get it from my father. I sold some of my designer clothes online, clothes I never wore anyway because I just bought them to prove I could, so it's my money. Take it." James looked at the envelope but didn't take it. That's not necessary. The school already ordered replacements. Madison's jaw tightened. I know it's not necessary. That's not the point. The point is I did something crappy, and I'm trying to make it right, so just take the stupid money so I can stop feeling like garbage about it. James finally took the envelope, but instead of opening it, he set it on his desk and gestured for her to come inside. You want to know why I really work here? He asked, sitting down in his battered office chair. Madison stayed in the doorway, uncertain. You said it pays better than teaching. He nodded. That's true, but there's more to it. When I came back from Iraq, I was angry. I'd seen friends die, for reasons I couldn't understand anymore. I'd done things I wasn't proud of, and then I came home to find my wife had left, and I had this little 6-year-old girl, who needed me to be her entire world. I was a mess. I drank too much. I picked fights. I pushed away everyone who tried to help. Sound familiar? Madison didn't answer, but she took a step into the office. James continued. One day, I was at my lowest point. I was working as a school janitor, different school, different city, and I was honestly thinking about just walking away from everything, just leaving Emma with my sister, and disappearing because I was convinced she'd be better off without me. And then this kid, maybe 13 years old, found me in the supply closet. He was crying because his parents were getting divorced and he felt like it was his fault. I don't know why he chose to talk to me. Maybe because I was safe, you know, just the janitor, someone who couldn't punish him or judge him or tell his parents. We talked for an hour. I told him it wasn't his fault, that sometimes adults make choices that have nothing to do with their kids, and while I was saying all these things to help him, I realized I was really talking to myself. I was telling myself that Emma's mom leaving wasn't about Emma being not enough. It was about her mom being broken in ways none of us could fix. He picked up the photo of Emma from his desk and looked at it with obvious love. That kid saved my life that day, and he never even knew it. So I kept working at schools, kept being present for kids who needed someone to listen, and eventually I figured out that maybe that was my purpose, not teaching in a classroom, but being there in the hallways, in the quiet moments, for the kids everyone else had written off as problems. Madison felt something hot slide down her cheek and realized she was crying. She wiped at her face angrily. My mom left because I wasn't enough. That's different from what you're saying. She had a perfect life, a perfect house, enough money to do anything she wanted. The only variable was me. So obviously I was the problem. James shook his head firmly. No, that's not how it works. Your mom left because something inside her was broken. Maybe she couldn't handle being a parent. Maybe she was dealing with depression or anxiety, or just realized she'd built a life she didn't actually want. But it had nothing to do with you not being enough. You were a 9-year-old child. The only thing you needed to be was yourself. Madison sank into the chair across from him, her entire body shaking with 6 years of held-back emotion. Then why does it hurt so much? Why do I hate everyone? Why can't I just be normal? James leaned forward, his expression gentle. Because you're grieved. You lost your mother, even though she's still alive somewhere. You lost your father, even though he lives in the same house. You lost the childhood you should have had, and nobody gave you permission to grieve those losses. They just expected you to move on, to be fine, to not cause problems. So you turned all that pain into anger, because anger feels stronger than sadness. Anger makes you feel like you have control. He was right. Madison knew he was right, and that knowledge broke something open inside her that had been locked tight for years. She cried in that small janitor's office, really cried for the first time since her mother had left, and James didn't try to stop her, or fix her, or make it better. He just sat there, present and solid and not going anywhere, exactly like he'd promised. After that Friday afternoon, something fundamental shifted in Madison's world. She didn't transform overnight into some perfect student. That wasn't how real change worked, but she stopped actively trying to make everyone around her miserable, which was a start. She still had her bad days, still snapped at teachers who pushed too hard, still walked around with walls up, but now when James saw her in the hallways, he'd give her a small nod, and she'd feel something settle inside her chest, proof that at least one person saw past the armor to the scared kid underneath. The other students noticed the change. Madison Ashford, not terrorizing the school, was like the sun rising in the west, unnatural and slightly alarming. Some of them started cautiously testing the waters, sitting near her at lunch, making small attempts at conversation. Madison didn't make it easy for them, but she didn't actively destroy them either, which was progress. 3 weeks after her breakdown in James's office, she found herself actually doing homework in the cafeteria, instead of plotting new ways to torment Mrs. Peterson. James was mopping nearby, and she could feel him keeping an eye on her without being obvious about it. A sophomore named Kelly approached her table, holding her lunch tray like a shield. "Is this seat taken?" Kelly asked, her voice trembling slightly. Madison looked up, saw the fear in the girl's eyes, and recognized it immediately. Kelly was one of the scholarship kids, someone who couldn't afford to get on Madison's bad side because she didn't have a billionaire father to protect her. The old Madison would have destroyed her just for asking. The new Madison, the one who was really trying to be better, gestured at the empty chair. "It's a free country," she said, not quite friendly, but not hostile either. Kelly sat down cautiously, like she was sharing space with a tiger that might or might not be asleep. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Kelly worked up the courage to speak again. "I heard you play piano. I saw you through the music room window once. You're really good." Madison felt her defensive walls slam up. "You were spying on me." Kelly shook her head quickly. "No, I was just walking past. I play violin. I wasn't trying to invade your privacy or anything." She started to stand up, clearly ready to flee, but Madison surprised herself by speaking. "Wait, sit down. I'm sorry. I'm not good at this." Kelly slowly sank back into her chair, watching Madison carefully. "Not good at what?" Madison gestured vaguely at the space between them. "This. People. Being normal. Not making everyone want to run away from me." Something in Kelly's expression softened. "I get that. I'm not good at people either. That's why I hide in the music room playing violin, when I should be socializing at lunch. It's easier to talk through music than to actually talk." Madison felt a small connection spark, the first genuine friendship moment she'd had in years. "You want to maybe play together sometime? Piano and violin?" Kelly's face lit up. "Seriously? Yeah, that would be amazing." James caught Madison's eye from across the cafeteria and gave her a barely perceptible thumbs up. She rolled her eyes at him, but she was smiling when she turned back to Kelly. That night, Madison did something she hadn't done in 6 years. She called her father's office and asked his assistant if he had time for dinner. She half expected to be brushed off with the usual excuses, but to her shock, her father cleared his schedule. They sat across from each other at the enormous dining table in their mansion, and for the first 5 minutes neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy with years of avoiding each other, of living separate lives under the same roof. Finally, Madison broke it. "I'm trying to be better. I thought you should know." Richard Ashford looked up from his plate, and Madison saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in a long time. Actual attention. "Better how?" Madison took a deep breath. "Better at school. Better at not making everyone's life hell. Better at being a human being instead of a disaster in designer clothes." She paused, then added quietly, "There's this janitor at Preston, James Martinez. He's been helping me. Not in a creepy way or anything, just talking to me like I'm a person instead of a problem to solve or an asset to manage." Her father set down his fork. "The janitor." There was something in his tone that made Madison bristle. "Don't do that. Don't dismiss him because he cleans floors for a living. He's a veteran who works 2 jobs to support his daughter. He went to college. He's probably a better parent than either of us have experienced in years." Richard Ashford looked like he'd been slapped, but after a moment he nodded slowly. "You're right. I apologize. Tell me more about him." So Madison did. She talked about Emma, and the insulin, and the cleaning supplies and the conversation in the music room. She talked about being angry and scared and hurt. She talked about her mother leaving, and how she'd spent 6 years blaming herself, and her father really listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk or checking his phone or thinking about his next board meeting. When she finished, there were tears on her father's face. "I failed you," he said simply. "When your mother left, I should have been there for you. Instead, I buried myself in work because I didn't know how to deal with my own pain. and I left you alone to deal with yours. I'm sorry, Madison. I'm so sorry. Madison felt her own tears falling. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be actually here, not just physically in the same house. Everything came crashing down on a Tuesday night in late October. Madison was at home doing homework when her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. It was a nurse from Children's Hospital. Emma Martinez had been rushed to the emergency room with severe diabetic ketoacidosis. She was asking for her father, but James was at his warehouse job and not answering his phone. The hospital had found Madison's number in Emma's backpack. Apparently, James had given it to his daughter as an emergency contact, just in case. Madison didn't think. She grabbed her father's car keys and drove herself to the hospital, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She'd met Emma exactly once, 2 weeks ago, when James had brought her to school to show her where he worked. The little girl had been shy but sweet, showing Madison pictures of her soccer team and talking about the cat she wanted to adopt. Madison had been awkward with her, not used to kids, but Emma had just smiled and said, "Dad says you're nice once people get past your scary face." It had made Madison laugh, really laugh, for the first time in months. Now that little girl was in the hospital, possibly dying, and Madison was racing through Seattle traffic like a character in an action movie. She made it to the hospital in 15 minutes, parked illegally, and ran through the emergency room doors. The nurse who'd called her looked relieved. "You're Madison. Emma keeps asking for her father. We've been trying to reach him, but his phone goes straight to voicemail." Madison pulled out her own phone with shaking hands. "Give me his warehouse. I'll find him." It took 20 minutes of calling, explaining, pleading with supervisors before James finally came on the line. Madison could hear the terror in his voice when she told him Emma was in the hospital. "I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Stay with her, please. Don't let her be alone." Madison had never been responsible for another person in her life. She'd barely been responsible for herself, but she nodded even though he couldn't see her. "I won't. I promise." The nurse led her to Emma's room. The little girl looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, hooked up to IVs and monitors that beeped rhythmically. Her face was pale, her dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. But when she saw Madison, she tried to smile. "You came," Emma whispered. Madison grabbed her hand, not caring that she was crying. "Of course I came. Your dad's on his way. He'll be here soon. You just need to hang on, okay? You need to keep fighting." Emma's grip was weak. "I'm tired. I didn't check my blood sugar today. I forgot. Dad's going to be so mad." Madison shook her head fiercely. "He's not going to be mad. He's just going to be glad you're okay. Everyone forgets things sometimes. That's why we have emergency rooms and doctors and people who care about us." She brushed Emma's hair back from her forehead the way she vaguely remembered her own mother doing, back before everything fell apart. "You know what your dad told me? He said you saved his life once, just by needing him, just by being his reason to keep going. So now you need to let us save yours." Emma's eyes were drifting closed. "Tell him I love him. Tell him I'm sorry." Madison felt panic claw at her throat. "You're going to tell him yourself. Emma, stay awake. Please, talk to me. Tell me about your soccer team. Tell me about the cat you want to adopt. Tell me anything." She kept talking, kept holding Emma's hand, kept begging this little girl she barely knew to just hold on for a few more minutes. The monitors around them beeped and whirred, and Madison had never felt more helpless or more desperate in her entire life. All her money, all her father's power, all the privilege she'd spent years weaponizing against people, none of it meant anything here. She couldn't buy Emma's help. She couldn't demand that the universe keep this child alive. All she could do was hold her hand and pray to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. James burst through the door 28 minutes later, still in his warehouse uniform, his face a mask of terror. He rushed to Emma's bedside, taking her other hand, his voice breaking as he spoke to his daughter. Madison stepped back, giving them space, but Emma's grip on her hand tightened. "Stay," the little girl whispered. So Madison stayed. She stood there holding Emma's hand, while James talked to the doctors, while they adjusted medications and monitors, while Emma's numbers slowly, agonizingly slowly, started to stabilize. She stayed through the long night as Emma drifted in and out of sleep. She She stayed when her father called frantically after finding the car gone, and she stayed when he showed up at the hospital an hour later, looking more worried than she'd seen him since her mother left. Richard Ashford took in the scene, his daughter holding the hand of a janitor's child in a hospital room, both of them looking exhausted and scared, and he didn't ask questions. He just went to get coffee for everyone, and made quiet phone calls to ensure Emma would have the best specialists the hospital could provide. Emma spent 3 days in the hospital, and Madison visited every single one of them. She brought homework and books and terrible jokes that made the little girl laugh. She played card games and watched movies on her laptop, and just sat there when Emma was too tired to talk, being present the way James had been present for her. On the 3rd day, when Emma was finally being discharged, the little girl grabbed Madison's hand with surprising strength. "You're like my big sister now," she said simply. "That's how it works. You saved my life, so now we're family." Madison felt something crack open in her chest, something warm and terrifying and wonderful. "I didn't save your life. The doctors did that." Emma shook her head stubbornly. "You stayed when you didn't have to. Dad says that's what family does. They stay even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." James appeared in the doorway, carrying Emma's discharge papers, and looking at Madison with an expression of profound gratitude. "She's right, you know. You didn't have to be here. But you were. That means something." Madison shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Anyone would have done the same." James smiled gently. "No, they wouldn't have. That's what makes it matter." The weeks that followed were different from anything Madison had experienced before. She found herself genuinely trying at school, not just showing up but actually participating. She joined Kelly for lunch regularly, and other students slowly started approaching their table. She still had bad days, still struggled with anger and fear, but now she had people who understood. She had James checking in on her in the hallways. She had her father actually showing up for dinner 3 nights a week. She had Emma calling her on weekends to tell her about soccer practice and the orange tabby cat they'd finally adopted. And she had Kelly, who became a real friend, the kind who called her out when she was being difficult but stuck around anyway. The Preston Academy talent show happened in December, right before winter break. Madison had never participated in anything at school beyond causing disruption, but Kelly convinced her to do a duet piano and violin playing a piece they'd been working on for weeks. Madison stood backstage, her hands shaking with nerves she'd never felt before. This was different from her usual performances in the empty music room. This was vulnerable. This was real. "You've got this," Kelly whispered beside her, holding her violin. Madison looked out into the audience and saw James sitting in the front row, with Emma beside him in her soccer jacket, and next to them, looking uncomfortable in a suit but present nonetheless, was her father, Richard Ashford, who had attended exactly 0 school events in the past 6 years, had cleared his schedule to watch his daughter play piano. Madison felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back. She walked onto the stage with Kelly, sat down at the piano, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment the old fear tried to surface, the voice that said she'd mess up, that everyone would judge her, that being vulnerable was dangerous. But then she looked at James, who gave her an encouraging nod, and at Emma, who was practically bouncing in her seat with excitement, and at her father, who was watching her with something that looked like pride. She started to play. The music flowed through her fingers like water, like breathing, like something she'd been holding back for too long finally being set free. Kelly's violin joined in, weaving around the piano melody in perfect harmony. They'd practiced this piece dozens of times, but performing it live was different. It was scary, and exhilarating, and real. When they finished, the gymnasium erupted in applause. Madison stood up, her heart pounding, and for the first time in 6 years, she let herself smile, really smile in front of people. Emma was on her feet cheering, and James was clapping with tears streaming down his face. Her father was standing too, applauding, with the kind of genuine emotion she hadn't seen from him since she was 9 years old. Backstage afterward, Madison was surrounded by people congratulating her, and instead of finding it suffocating, she found herself actually enjoying it. Kelly hugged her tight. "We killed it. Did you see everyone's faces?" Madison laughed. We actually didn't suck. That's basically a miracle. James found her in the crowd, with Emma attached to his side. The little girl launched herself at Madison, wrapping her arms around her waist. You were amazing. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Madison hugged her back. This kid who'd somehow become her little sister, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. James didn't say anything, just pulled her into a hug too, and Madison let herself be held by this janitor who'd seen past her walls, and refused to give up on her. When her father approached, looking uncertain, Madison took the first step. Thanks for coming down. Richard Ashford's voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for inviting me, Madison. I know I have a lot to make up for, years of absence and neglect, but I want to try, if you'll let me. Madison nodded. I want to try too. We're both pretty bad at this family thing, but maybe we can figure it out together. Her father smiled, really smiled, and pulled her into an awkward but genuine hug. Over his shoulder, Madison caught James's. The janitor who'd changed everything just nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and pride, and then stepped back to give her family their moment. That night, Madison sat in her room, looking at the photo of her and her mother that she'd carried in her bag for 6 years. She finally understood what James had tried to tell her months ago. Her mother leaving had nothing to do with Madison not being enough. Some people were broken in ways that had nothing to do with the people around them. Madison couldn't fix her mother, or bring her back, or change the past. But she could choose her future. She could choose to let people in. She could choose to be vulnerable and scared, and imperfect, and still worthy of love. She carefully placed the photo in a drawer, not throwing it away, but not carrying it like a talisman of her unworthiness anymore. Then she opened her laptop and started an email to her mother, something she'd never done before. She didn't know if her mother would read it, or respond, and honestly, it didn't matter. She just needed to say what she needed to say. The email was simple. I'm doing better now. I have people who care about me. I'm learning that I'm enough exactly as I am, messy and angry, and imperfect. I hope you find that too wherever you are. I forgive you, not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to the anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you. I'm choosing to let it go. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, and then she called Kelly to talk about nothing important, just to hear a friend's voice. Spring came to Preston Academy with cherry blossoms and longer days, and the kind of warmth that made everything feel possible. Madison was finishing her sophomore year, and the change in her was obvious to everyone who'd known her before. She wasn't perfect. She still had moments of anger, still struggled with trust, still built walls when she felt threatened. But now she had tools to deal with those moments, and more importantly, she had people who loved her through them. She'd started a tutoring program for younger students who were struggling, not because she wanted recognition, but because she remembered what it felt like to be lost and angry and desperate for someone to see past the surface. She worked with scholarship kids mostly, the ones who didn't have safety nets, who couldn't afford to fail. James had helped her set it up using his connections with teachers and administrators to make it official. Emma was thriving too. Her diabetes was better managed with the top specialists Richard Ashford had quietly arranged and paid for without making a big deal about it. She joined Madison and Kelly's informal family, showing up at their music practices, and somehow becoming friends with both of them despite the age difference. The three of them had become an unlikely unit, the former problem child, the scholarship violinist, and the janitor's daughter with a big heart and bigger dreams. Madison's relationship with her father was still a work in progress, but it was progress. They had dinner together several nights a week now. He'd cut back his hours at work and actually showed up for things that mattered to her. He came to her piano recitals, met Kelly and her family, and treated James with the respect the man deserved. He'd even offered to help James finish his teaching degree, but James had politely declined, saying he liked where he was. I'm not meant to teach in a classroom, James had explained when Madison asked him about it later. I'm meant to be in the hallways, in the margins, catching the kids who fall through the cracks. That's my calling, and I'm good at it. Not every purpose looks impressive on paper, but that doesn't make it less important. Madison understood that now. She'd learned that value wasn't measured in titles or money or status. It was measured in presence, in showing up, in refusing to give up on people even when they'd given up on themselves. On the last day of school before summer break, Madison found James in his usual spot, cleaning the hallways that would be empty for the next 3 months. She walked up to him and just stood there for a moment, not sure how to say what she needed to say. James looked up and smiled. Big summer plans, Madison shrugged. Dad's taking me to Europe. Actual vacation, not just him working from a different office while I wander around alone. Kelly might come with us for part of it. She paused. I wanted to thank you for not giving up on me, for seeing something worth saving when everyone else just saw a problem to avoid. James set down his mop and gave her his full attention. You saved yourself, Madison. I just gave you a safe space to do it. Don't give me credit for your own courage and hard work. Madison felt the familiar sting of tears but didn't fight them this time. I don't know who I'd be right now if you hadn't pushed back that day we collided, probably expelled from another school, probably even more angry and alone than I was. James shook his head. I don't believe that. You're strong, Madison. You always have been. You just needed to learn that strength doesn't always look like walls and anger. Sometimes it looks like vulnerability. Sometimes it looks like asking for help. Sometimes it looks like showing up even when you're scared. They stood there in the empty hallway, the janitor and the girl who'd terrorized the school, and Madison realized this was what family actually looked like. Not perfect people who never hurt each other, but imperfect people who chose to stay and work through the hurt together. I'm going to miss seeing you every day, she admitted. James laughed. I'll still be here when you get back. That's kind of my thing, being here when people need me. Besides, Emma would never forgive me if I didn't stay in touch with her big sister. Madison smiled at that. 6 months ago, she'd been completely alone, pushing away everyone who tried to care. Now she had a little sister, a best friend, a father who was actually trying, and a janitor who'd become the most important mentor in her life. She had people, she had purpose, she had hope. The next morning, Madison stopped by James's house before her flight. Emma answered the door and immediately tackled her with a hug. You're going to send me pictures, right, of all the places you visit? Madison ruffled her hair. Every single day, and I'm bringing you back something special. What do you want? Emma thought for a moment. Just come back, that's all I want. Madison felt her throat tighten. I promise, I'm not going anywhere permanently. This is my home now. You guys are my family. James appeared behind his daughter, and Madison saw the pride in his eye. Have a good trip, you've earned it, and remember, being happy doesn't mean you've forgotten your pain, or betrayed who you used to be. It just means you've learned to carry it differently. Madison nodded, committing his words to memory the way she'd been doing for months now. All the small pieces of wisdom James offered casually, like they were obvious truths instead of life-changing insights. She hugged them both goodbye and headed to the airport where her father was waiting. As the plane took off, Madison looked out the window at Seattle disappearing below her, and thought about everything that had changed. A year ago, she'd been drowning in anger and loneliness, convinced she was unlovable, determined to prove it by making everyone hate her. Now she was on a plane to Europe with her father, texting Kelly about meeting up in Paris, already planning video calls with Emma to show her the Eiffel Tower. Now she had a future that looked like something more than just survival. She had people who loved her, not despite her flaws but including them. She had learned that being vulnerable wasn't weakness, that asking for help wasn't failure, that letting people in didn't mean they'd automatically leave. And she had learned all of it from a single dad janitor who worked 2 jobs and saw value in a broken teenager that everyone else had written off. Madison pulled out her phone and sent James a text. Thank you for being the person who stepped. His response came back almost immediately. Thank you for being brave enough to let me. Madison smiled and settled back in her seat, watching clouds drift past her window, and for the first time in 6 years, she felt genuinely excited about her future. Not because everything was perfect, but because she finally understood that perfect wasn't the goal. Connection was the goal. Growth was the goal. Showing up for the people you loved and letting them show up for you, that was the goal. And Madison Ashford, former terror of Preston Academy, was finally learning how to do exactly that.